America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Elaine Parker with the Job Creators Network. Education remains one of the top concerns for American families, even if it's not dominating cable news headlines. New federal policy is opening doors for school choice, but not every state is taking advantage of this opportunity. Today's conversation, what's at stake, who benefits, and why some states are leaving opportunities behind. We're joined by Chip Rogers, very good friend to JCN and CEO of Americans for Fair Treatment, and a leading voice on expanding educational opportunity across the country. Chip has been at the forefront of advocating for policies that empower families, especially working-class parents, with more choices on how their children are educated. He's here to break down why the Education Freedom Tax Credit could be a game changer and why some states are still resisting it. Welcome to the show.
Oh, so good to be with you again. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming back. There's been, a lot of movement in education. Actually, breaking news, Georgia just passed the HB 328 that we were working on, which expanded those scholarship dollars. So thank you for your efforts on helping get that done. Last week, just at the top of everything, can you kind of break down what happened in Georgia and how that ended up getting over the line? I know we were all working really hard on it.
A lot of effort, a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails, a lot of text messages, all on behalf of the kids for a program that has proven to be unbelievably successful. Now, I have a little bit of a personal history here. When this bill that created this program was first introduced, I was the Senate sponsor of it, and my dear friend, Representative David Cassis out of Atlanta, was the House sponsor. And so the bill passed out of the House, and it came out of the Ways and Means Committee, and it came to the Senate. At the time, I was in the Senate, and I was the Senate Finance Chair. And the way that the rules work in Georgia, and it's different in all 50 states, but in the House, the Speaker can keep the vote open as long as he or she wants. And then when he or she has the votes, they can close the machine and the count is done with. In the Senate, you have 1 minute to vote, and that's it. So when this bill passed the House, the Speaker kept the machine open for, 10, 15 minutes until he finally stared down every member he needed to get the vote. And once he hit 91, which was required, he closed the machine and locked it. Now, the reason all this is, I'm telling you this story is because then the bill comes over to the Senate. And if we had changed a single thing, all my friends in the House said, look, we're not going to be able to pass it again. Like, this is your one chance. You cannot change anything. You have to pass this as is and send it to the governor for his signature. And so I told my team, look, even if you find a typographical error, they're allowed to correct that later. We're not accepting any amendments under any circumstances. And then when we got to the floor, where we had to secure the bill in a way, it's called engrossment, that doesn't allow any amendments to even be offered on it. And we were able to do that, and it get passed. A single vote in the House. We had a lot more votes in the Senate, and the governor signed it. Now, I tell that whole story to say we didn't really know what was going to happen at the time. The cap was $25 million, but we knew there was a demand out there. And so the program starts, student scholarship organizations get underway. And in the first year, the demand was so high that they reached the $25 million cap in just the first couple of days. And then it became more and more popular. And every year after that, when the scholarships were made available, they would get filled up on the first day. There was just this huge demand. And the state of Georgia kept raising it from 25 to 35 to 45 to 55. And as of today, it sits at $125 million. But again, every single time this thing is so popular, day one, all the scholarships get accounted for. Now, with this bill that passed, it's going to double it from $125 million to $250 million. And thousands of more students in Georgia are going to get a taste of educational freedom. And it is just a wonderful thing. And that little bill that we worked on that started way back when, that we had to pass by a single vote, now is up to $250 million. Just amazing.
And I read that the cap, when it was at 125 million, would literally, it was gone on day one, every single year. Every single year, that the cap.
Every single year.
That
was from the beginning, really, like from the very beginning. Yeah. And we kept fighting, so many people that worked on this. Representative Earl Earhart back in the day, I remember he and I sitting in the governor's office begging him to raise the cap, because we're like, look, it gets filled every day. The demand is there. What the interesting part about it is that when you figure in the private donations that are going into this, these students are getting actually educated for less money per capita than what the state would spend on them to begin with. So if you take the tax credit and you add it to what the spending would be, the taxpayers are getting it for less.
Explain how these tax credits work, for example, in Georgia, because other states have them too. But explain how it works in Georgia, and how these students are benefiting. You called it student scholarship organizations, SSOs.
Yeah. So if you think about educational freedom, it really comes down into three major buckets. I'm going to set aside charter schools. Charter schools are public schools, a great option for a lot of people. There are online charter schools, again, public schools. But when you think about how do I have full economic educational freedom to go to where I want, it comes down into three major ways in which states attack this. One is just an outright tax credit, in that, let's say that I spend $10,000 for my child to go to a private school. I would get a tax credit of some amount, sometimes the entire amount, sometimes less than that, to cover those costs. The second way to do it is just an outright voucher, which the state says, okay, every child that wants to exercise educational freedom, we're going to give you a voucher equal to a certain number of dollars. Let's say, again, $10,000, and you can use that $10,000 to go to whatever school that you want to. And then, if it costs more than that, then your parents, of course, would have to come out of pocket to pay for that. The third way is the Student Scholarship Organization. The reason that's so important, because this is the way the federal program is set up, that I'm sure we're going to talk about in just a minute. And what that says is that any Georgia taxpayer can donate money and receive a tax credit up to a certain amount. I haven't done that in a few years because I'm not a resident of the state any longer, but I want to say it is around $2,000, $3,000 that you could get as a tax credit. That goes into a scholarship organization. You, as the taxpayer, do not get to direct where that money goes. You can only give it to the scholarship organization. The scholarship organization then pools that money and gives out the scholarships to the students that they think are deserving. And scholarship organizations come in all shapes and sizes. I remember one of the scholarship organizations I was most proud to be a part of, or to help in this respect, was one that only gave out scholarships to students that were coming out of subsidized housing or government housing. And these were the kids that are coming out of some of the poorest families that really didn't have much of an educational opportunity. And this particular student scholarship organization was giving them an opportunity. And so there's three ways to do this. Georgia went down. Georgia actually does it in multiple ways. And so a lot of kids in Georgia, hundreds of thousands, are eligible now for scholarships or some sort of voucher or something that can give them some educational freedom.
And what this did was expand on what Georgia already had through the Promise Scholarship Act that was passed, I guess, in 2024. I can't believe it's already been 2 years, which we worked on that together too. That is true. Actually, the voucher system, bucket number 2 that you were just describing, where the money follows the child.
Yeah, that particular law affects the children in the worst performing schools, which is good. I mean, that's one way to approach it, is you say, well, these are the kids that need it most. So you have that. You have the Student Scholarship Organization tax credit that's been around for a long time. This legislation now doubles that to $250 million as a cap. And then you also have the Special Needs Scholarship, which was the first scholarship, the first school choice educational freedom that passed in Georgia. Big shout out to former Senator Eric Johnson, who really championed that. And it allowed children who have special needs to attend the school that they needed to go to. This is a win-win for everybody. A good friend of mine, Dr. Ben Scafferty, who now teaches at Kennesaw State, he was one of the leading architects of this. And when we passed this, what was fascinating was we came back a few years later and we asked both the parents and the students of these special needs scholarships, how's this working for you? Like, are you doing better? And it was amazing. The approval rates were in the mid to upper 90 percentile for these parents and these students who were taking advantage of these scholarships to go to schools that helped deal with the student's special need.
You talk to parents across the country on this issue. What are some of the biggest frustrations that you hear from parents about education right now?
Two things, to be blunt, stupid politicians and teachers unions. And sadly, they seem to be linked a lot when it comes election time. Look, the reality is that teachers unions have been told that these things are bad. It makes really no sense whatsoever. In fact, first, when educational freedom started way back in places like Milwaukee and Chicago and Washington, D.C., it was almost exclusively an inner city issue that was championed by Democrats who saw their inner city schools failing and were just trying to come up with some other opportunity for those children who weren't getting a good education. Those programs were fantastic. They've worked for decades now, and thank God that somebody stepped up and did the right thing. But unfortunately, like so many other things, it has become politicized. The teachers unions, for whatever reason, well, I mean, I know the reason, but the teachers unions have come out and steadfastly opposed this, which mathematically it's a strange thing because you're going to have the same number of children attending schools. And so theoretically, you'd have the same number of teachers, or you might even have more teachers because some of these schools have a lower student to teacher ratio. So they're not taking teachers' jobs. In fact, they probably are adding to teachers' jobs. But as you and I both know, there's a part of this whole ecosystem that doesn't really care about money, frankly, doesn't really care about the kids. All they want is control. Those are the people that don't like educational freedom, and that is oftentimes championed by the unions and politicians who really don't care about kids. Because you cannot, and I will argue and debate this issue with any human alive. I've had that offer out there for 20-something years. You cannot look at the facts and tell me that giving children less choices, taking away educational freedom, is good for kids. No parent wants that. No child wants that. It's a ridiculous assertion to say that less opportunity and less choices are better for children. We know it works. It's been working now for decades. And thankfully, Georgia and many other places are expanding it.
What's the biggest criticism coming from teachers unions and folks who are, anti-education freedom?
Well, up until recently, until we had some just shocking testimony out of a Minnesota teacher about 2 weeks ago, they would always say it's taking away money from the quote public schools. Now, I've always said let's forget the adjective that goes ahead of the word schools, because who really cares at the end of the day? We want kids educated the best way possible. So it's public school, private school, charter school, homeschool, hybrid school, or some combination thereof. Whatever's best for the child, that's what we want. And we people outside of the family system shouldn't be making that decision. That's up to the parent. So if the parent likes the traditional public school, great. That's best for them, or charter school, or any of that. Okay. But what they would argue is that the money is quote, leaving the public schools. The reality is the way that we fund education today and have always funded education is on a per pupil basis. So if a school is sitting empty, there are no students, you wouldn't send money there. The state's not going to send money there. The county's not going to send money there. The federal government's not going to send money there because there are no children to educate. And so the money has always, from a taxpayer standpoint, followed the child. And I'll use the example of Georgia. In Georgia, and I'm going to throw these numbers out there, they're not exact, but about 50-50. About half the money comes from the state, and about half the money comes from local property taxes. When a child, I'm going to give an example of two major counties in Georgia. Let's say Cobb County and Fulton County, which are two of the big core counties in Atlanta. When a child moves from one county to the other, let's say they move out of Fulton County, go to Cobb County, the money for that child from the state follows that child to the new school system, as it should, because now that new system is educating the child. But the local property tax money being derived from wherever that child lived, even if they lived in an apartment, property tax is being paid, that stays in the system where they were. And so if you now have one fewer child to educate, but you have the money, at least half the money to educate that child because the child's no longer gone, then as you extrapolate that over all the children, you actually have more money per student left as that child went to a new system. And so the exact same thing is happening whether that child goes from Fulton County to Cobb County, as opposed to that child going from Fulton County into a private school. The state money or the credit is following them. The local money stays there. So on a per pupil basis, mathematically, you actually have more per student. And so the argument that there's less money has always been a false argument. It will always be a false argument. But for people who don't really understand this, they fall prey to those simple arguments. The reality is, we just saw testimony a couple of weeks ago, and I posted a lot about this on X from a teacher in Minnesota. She actually said the thing that she wasn't supposed to say. And she said, oh, no, this is about control. Like, we actually don't want the children to get out of the government run schools. We want to control them in what they're learning. That has always been the truth. But up until now, very few people have ever been willing to say it publicly.
Yeah, it's great when they say the quiet part out loud, because it helps. It's that aha moment for everybody else where we finally understand what the real motive is. And in the end, it's kids who are being hurt because, as you know, I mean, wealthy families, wealthy children have always had education freedom because their parents can afford to live in the right zip codes. And if they don't like those schools, they can take their kids out and send them to private schools, and they can afford all the tutoring they need. So they have always had education freedom. This really does impact middle class and poor Americans. And this is a big issue. This is the biggest civil rights issue of our time. And so to have these false narratives fighting legislation that simply provides choice, it doesn't take one thing away in place of another. It simply gives these parents choice to decide, how does my child learn the best? What environment will work the best? What teaching style will work the best for my child? Because every child is different in how they learn. I have two daughters. They learned very different in school, and I had to handle their learning needs very differently in terms of, whether one needed tutoring or how one tested, or one needed, more quiet area to test. I mean, there were different ways to handle them. One of them, we tried alternative schools. We tried regular schools. We tried the gamut. We tried what worked for us. And I think all parents should have that choice.
Yeah, look, what parents care about is their child being educated. I don't meet too many parents that really care about, again, the adjective that goes before the word school or the adjective that goes before the word education. They just want education for their children. We all know that children learn in a multitude of ways. They learn while they're at school. They learn at home. They learn with their friends. They learn each and everywhere. So there's no one single way in which a child's educated. But there is one single person, or hopefully two people, that know what's best for that child, and that is the parents. So as you mentioned a moment ago, this notion that you send children to a school based on the U.S. postal mailing address is absurd. And if you don't think that school choice has always been around, just go talk to any realtor that you know and say, hey, do you have any schools or any homes that are in certain districts where you can charge a premium for living there because the schools are better in that district than this district down the street? And of course, every realtor will tell you that is absolutely the case and has always been the case. And so wealthier people got to move into the better school districts. And now we're saying, you know what, that's ridiculous. It shouldn't be a U.S. postal mailing address that's determining this. It should be how is best and what is best for the child, and the best entity to determine that is the parent, not some government bureaucrat that has never met the child. And I'll say one other thing too that's often lost. I mean, we hear this argument from superintendents and principals, and they're like, well, my school's great. You know what? You may have a great school. There are a lot of great schools out there, public schools, private schools, a lot of great schools of every flavor. But that doesn't mean that a great school is perfect for every child that goes to that school. What if you have a child that's been bullied? What if you have a child that just doesn't fit in? What if you have a child that doesn't work well with the teachers that he or she has that year? I mean, a lot of things come into play here as to why a parent and a child would choose another educational setting. And it's not always about whether the school is good, because we're individualizing education. It's what school and what setting is best for the parent and the child.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And that's why the choice here is so important for parents to be able to make a choice for what works best for them. It's so personal for each family. The One Big Beautiful Bill that was passed last year for the first time included an education freedom tax credit. Tell us about that and why some states are choosing not to opt into it.
Well, any governor that doesn't opt into it, I'm just going to say it, they're an idiot. They're just an idiot. Or they care so little about the children in their state and are so controlled by their unions that they're evil. So they're either misguided or they're evil. Neither is good for a governor of any state. Here's the way the system works. It's very much set up the way the Georgia system is on scholarships. Any taxpayer in America, in any state, all 50 states, will be allowed to make a tax-deductible contribution to a student scholarship organization. In other words, they're going to receive, I shouldn't say deductible, it's a credit actually. They're going to receive a tax credit. So it's a dollar for dollar off of what they owe up to a certain amount of money. So that money, whether your governor decides to opt in or not, that money from those taxpayers in your state is going to go out. The question is, are you going to let it come back in? That's the only question. And so if you're not opting into this, what that means is, and I'll use the state of Illinois for an example, right? J.B. Pritzker running his mouth saying he's not going to do this, not going to help Trump, blah, 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 all the nonsense. Illinois taxpayers can opt into this because it's a federal tax credit. It has nothing to do with Illinois money whatsoever. This is federal money. So Illinois taxpayers can get the credit. But if he doesn't opt in, it means the children of those taxpayers can't take advantage of the scholarships. And some of these scholarships are even for public schools. So even if you were saying, I want more money for the government schools, this money does come back into the government schools as well, in addition to tutoring and all sorts of other things. And so for you as a governor to say, I'm not going to opt into this, is basically saying, I know that the taxpayers in my state are willing to put money into this, but I'm not going to allow the children of my state to receive the benefit. I mean, that's just mean-spirited. And that's why you're seeing some Democrats starting to relook at this because, as somebody once famously said, I used to hear it on the radio all the time, this is the biggest no-brainer in the history of Earth. Like, you're crazy if you don't opt into this because you're only hurting your own students, and it's not even touching your state tax money at all.
It costs them nothing to opt into it and allow their students to participate in it. Because you're right, the taxpayers of their states can participate in it and take the deduction. So once they do that, it seems completely unfair that the students of that state now won't be able to benefit. I read that there's 28 mostly Republican-led states that have opted into it, with Colorado being a Democrat governor. And I believe Kentucky just joined the ranks of that as well, Democrat governor. But no other Democrat-led states.
Well, let's be clear about the difference between those two. The Democrat governor of Colorado, Jared Polis, said this is a no-brainer, and he opted in. The Kentucky governor vetoed it, but luckily the Kentucky legislature, led by Republicans, overrode his veto, and Andy Beshear, given these comments and other comments he's made about other things, I don't know how this guy sleeps at night. I mean, he is so anti-child. It's breathtaking that you would be so against the children of your state in that way, in many ways for Andy Beshear. But these people, look, when the union says jump, they say how high. And it's pretty sad that you take your direction from the union leadership and not helping the parents and the children in your own state. It's really just a sad commentary on any governor that doesn't take advantage of this.
Well, we're going to be focused on making sure that the existence of this education freedom tax credit at the federal level gets highlighted. We're going to be pushing out these messages because we think that if the residents of these states, like Illinois and other states like even, Kentucky overrode the governor, but states like that, where if the governor starts to hear from constituents that they want this, they want their students to be able to take it. I think some of it is we need to brand it. We need to make sure that people know it exists so that they know to ask for it because, as well as I do, if you hear from your constituents, you listen because they'll vote you out.
Yeah, look, if I was around the state of North Carolina where the North Carolina Democrat governor has he decided not to opt into the program. He said he was thinking about doing it later. If I were in South Carolina or Virginia, well, not Virginia because that's now led by Democrats, but other states, I'd be putting up big billboards. Please send us your money so we can educate our children across the state line because your governor's too stupid or too mean not to help his or her own children. And so make a big deal about this because this is This is one of those issues where there's no gray. I mean, this is truly black and white. Either you care about kids or you don't care about kids. And when a system is set up that could bring millions and millions and millions of dollars into your state to help educate your children, and you say to that system, and it doesn't cost you a penny, and you say, no, I don't want that money because I don't want my children helped because they might escape the failing and poor schools they're in today, you got to look at yourself in the mirror and think, man, what am I doing? How can I be that evil to stand in the way of these children getting an education? Doug Ducey talked a lot about it. It's like, years and years ago, the unions and the bureaucrats, they stood against minority children getting into the schools. And now they're literally standing against these same children, letting them escape to better schools. It is reprehensible what they're doing.
What is your advice to parents who want to learn more about these education freedom tax credits? Where can they go to find out more information?
Well, the first thing I would do, depending on what state you're in, is look and see what does your current state do already, because there's a lot of states out there that already do some sort of educational freedom. There's also a lot of private scholarship money out there that goes beyond just anything that is supported by tax credits or vouchers or scholarship organizations. As far as the federal program is concerned, these things will start popping up in a large way once those tax credits start or the donations start being given and the tax credits taken in the next tax year. And so you could do any type of search. I always use x.com. You could go to x.com, do a search, and it will tell you all about it. But there are so many opportunities out there. And then, look, as I mentioned a moment ago, we should never think about education as just those hours in which our children might be at school, because there's all the other hours in the day. I know for my own kids, I used to use Khan Academy for them all the time. I don't know what the ratio was between what they learned on Khan Academy and what they learned at the school they were at, but I do know it was a combination of both. And so there are a lot of wonderful resources out there that can help children, whether they're at school or whether they're at home or whether they're on vacation or anywhere else.
We used Khan Academy too. I remember that. So yes, good advice. Well, Chip, thank you so much for working with us and fighting this fight for our kids across America. I think that the success we continue to see in this area has been wonderful. And if there's one good thing that came out of COVID, it's that parents are deciding that they want to be in charge of their kids' education. And that has been a really positive thing. And in a sea of negative things with COVID, that's been a positive thing. So I want to thank you for taking the time to join us on Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. And thank you all for taking the time to tune in. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network. New episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday. You can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast from, and we'll be back soon with another episode.